Gonna make a quick video how to repair a Samsung Plasma TV. It started having a loud popping coming from the power supply. That's the model number if it focuses. PN50B650S1 FXZA. It is maybe from 2009 and it just failed on us in late 2021. The popping was coming from down here. So I'm going to start off by taking off these bolts around the perimeter of the frame so we can get to the main board and see what's causing it. I believe it's the Y sustain board, but we'll pull it open, power it up, and see what happens. So to remove this back panel, you want to get all these screws that have an arrow pointing to them. There's two that are kind of hidden, and that's on this and this one right here. Make sure that you get those. Also, be very careful. This sheet metal is very sharp. If you have any gloves that can protect your hands, use them now. With the back of the enclosure open, you can see everything. The loud popping noise and the arc was definitely coming from this part. I don't see any burn evidence, or none of the capacitors look like they have blown. I'll probably take off the board here in a little bit. Just be very careful when you're back here. This is high voltage stuff, and you can hurt yourself if you're not careful. I have it unplugged. This has been unplugged for about a month while we were waiting for Christmas season to be over, and I would be able to take it down and put it here. This is where we usually put the tree, but so everything is safely discharged, all the capacitors, so I'm not too worried about it right now. But once we do a live test, I will be wearing gloves to check out where the popping's coming from. But to remove this board, you can see we'll disconnect it from the power supply board, from that board mount connector, and we have some flex cables right here, some flex PCB. We'll be able to bend that forward a little bit and just pull this whole assembly out. Just make sure not to break any of the connectors, any of the board mount connectors on there. So I took off the board and I don't see any burn marks or places where it could have arced. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and power it up and watch to see where the sparks are coming from. Only other thing that I can think of is maybe something moved over time, or some dust caused a ground path, maybe like a tin whisker or something grew from the tinning. But we're going to be watching in this area for potential arc. So I'm plugging it in. Get a click from the board. Aha, that's where it is. Yep, that down in there. Looks like that MOSFET. Well, I'm not going to replace that. Probably just going to find the whole board for 50 bucks and change out the whole thing. So once you have the new PCB assembly inspected, and I cleaned it up just to get all the dust off of it, prevent hopefully some future failures. After you get it cleaned up, I would recommend keeping this loose since that's designed to slide, mounting this first and then pushing these connectors into place. So when you're putting the PCB back on, it's always good to have helpers, but most of the time you'll have some little sheet metal features in there to make sure that the PCB goes in where it needs to. So you can just use those to your advantage and just have it hang on those. See, you can see, and that'll hold it enough in place for me to have my hands free so that I can screw in all these fasteners. And when you're putting these in, I just like to go back and forth, not to torque or not to put any weird torque on the board. And also remember, this is a PCB. You don't need to tighten it like crazy. These ground planes are going to make contact with not too much torque on them, and you certainly don't want to damage the PCB layers by over tightening it. So another little helpful tip when you're screwing in these, don't tighten them all the way. Insert all your screws first before you tighten them, and that way you just make sure that all your holes are lining up and you don't have any screws coming in at an angle that could possibly damage the threads in the sheet metal or the pressed-in nuts on the sheet metal. So I've got this all mounted and ready to go. My connection to the plasma is still loose. You can see here that they had some sort of tooling to insert these. So you just want to make sure that you're pushing directly in this direction. That way you don't want to bend any pins or damage anything there. Since we don't have whatever tool that they designed to put those together, we're just going to be really careful not to damage these connectors. And so once you got these in, you'll see that they're completely seated, and also your ground screws are going to line up to where, well, those are slotted, so don't pay attention to those, but these are, and you can see these hard stops are all the way down in the slots in the PCB, so we know that that is good to go. And to tighten this thing, I just pushed it here, and I use my other hands to kind of help these connectors by pinching them together. But yeah, just make sure you don't bend those pins. I'd hate for you to get this thing ordered and installed and then have one of these pins bend on you and ruin the whole thing. So I got this thing almost tightened down, but I just wanted to show anybody who's using a power driver how I'm torquing these down. So I'm just using a very light touch on my screw gun, not going too fast. And as soon as I feel that resistance, that's where I'm torquing it. Doesn't need to be tighter than that. They're pretty small screws, pretty fine thread. You don't want to strip them out. And then we gotta go and connect the cables going from the power supply and the main board to here, as well as the lower board down there. And same thing here, you want to just make sure that you are inserting these connectors perpendicular to the PCB. I'll put in the strain relief later once I test this board. Again, on this right angle one, you just want to make sure that you're pushing. I like to pinch them. And then with this flat connector, you want to insert it. And then once you know it's in, you just push down that little latch, and that's connected there. So now that we've got everything reconnected, it's time to power it up and see what happens. If you'll recall, when I would apply power to the TV. Down here we'd get some arcing, some short on these components down here. So we're hoping that this new board fixes it, and as always is electronic, has some higher voltages. You want to plug in and just be very careful not to get shocked. So far so good, no popping. And I'll check the display here in a second. And you can see that it's working. Everything looks good to go. And hopefully I'll be able to get another 10 years out of this. Just gonna reverse the steps which I took it apart, put the screws back in the front, and mount it back on the wall. Thanks for watching.